It is time to check in on Iranian state media. We're going to look at what stories they are telling us today. What angles are they pushing for? What are they emphasizing? Which gives us a sense of where they want things to go. So it's actually quite something. I wouldn't say entertaining. That would be a little bit macabre. But we're going to take a look at what they're talking about. Here we go. So the top story today in WANA, that's the English language Iranian state media, wanaen.com. I read it every day. The top story right now is airstrike on Tehran damages Golestan Palace, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Ooh, that's interesting. So they want to be accusing the United States and Israel of war crimes. Now, before I read you the details of that story, I want to frame it with another story that was up on WANA's front page today, right down near the bottom, down near here. We have Larijani, we will not engage in any negotiations with the United States. But look what it actually, when you open the story, it says, Larijani, Iran is prepared for a prolonged war. Iran's Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and this is Ali Larijani, so you should learn that name if you don't know it already. He is really President Pezeshkian is not nearly as powerful as Ali Larijani. He was like the number one advisor to Ali Khamenei, to the Ayatollah, and he was the lead negotiator. He's the guy who, it seems, is really running things. So look what he says here. Iran's Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, emphasizing that Iran did not initiate the war and that Iran's brave armed forces have carried out no attacks except in self-defense, really, against Qatar and the UAE and Bahrain and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Okay. But they've carried out no attacks except in self-defense, said that Iran, unlike the United States, is prepared for a long-term war. This goes back to the buttons they're trying to push when it comes to Trump. I've been emphasizing this since before the war, that Trump wants this thing to be over quickly, and prolonging the war, escalating the war, causing U.S. casualties. These are the things that the Iranians want to do. They don't need to win, but they need to do these things enough that the pressure ramps up on Trump to end this. Okay, so they're signaling that here by saying, we're ready to fight for a long-term war. We want this to be dragged out. Ali Larijani wrote on his X account on Monday evening, that's today, as in the past 300 years, Iran has not been the initiator of war, and our brave armed forces have conducted no operations except in defense. Regardless of the cost, we will resolutely defend ourselves and our 6,000-year-old civilization. He added that we will make our enemies regret their miscalculation. Iran is prepared for a prolonged war, unlike the United States. Now, why is he talking about the 6,000-year-old civilization? Right? What exactly is he referring to? Well, he's Persian, right? He's not speaking in Muslim terms, right? Islam starts in the 7th century, far less than 6,000 years ago. So he's signaling, he's trying to like conjure up like Persian pride, like the Persian people are being attacked. Our 6,000-year-old civilization. You're a Muslim. You preach a regime. You are part of a regime that is an Islamic regime. You reject the traditional Persian culture. But no, it's the 6,000-year-old Persian tradition. And I think that that's the same signaling that we're seeing with this top story, that the top story with everything else going on in the war, the top story is that there was an airstrike on Tehran that damaged the Golestan Palace. Now notice, it doesn't say there was an airstrike on the palace. And that's what I noticed when I first saw the headline. So when I opened up the story, sure enough, look what it says here. In a nighttime attack by the United States and Israel on Arg Square in central Tehran, parts of the Golestan Palace, the capital's only UNESCO World Heritage Site, were damaged. They were damaged. Now, it doesn't say they were destroyed. It doesn't say that it was an attack on the palace. It was an attack on something near the palace, and parts of it were damaged. How bad was the damage? Hard to say. The room doesn't look that badly damaged. There's some items broken on the floor. The walls and windows all seem pretty much intact. Not much of a picture we have here. Golestan Palace is a historic complex of buildings and gardens whose construction dates back to the reign of Shah Tahmasp, the first of the Safavid dynasty. During the Zand period, the palace briefly served as the residence of Karim Khan, and in the Qajar era, it was extensively expanded to accommodate the royal family of the new capital. During the Pahlavi era, the palace was used for official ceremonies and to host presidents and distinguished foreign guests, and it was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in July 2013. Now look, like the poles and ropes are still up. And the walls, how damaged is this place? Extent of the damage. The blast waves from the Sunday night attack caused damage to sections of the palace, including the wooden doors, the orsi, traditional Persian windows, and parts of the mirror work. Syed Reza Salah Amiri, Minister of Cultural Heritage, Tourism, and Handicrafts, confirmed the damages during his visit on Monday, March 2nd, stating that a report on the incident would be submitted to UNESCO and as the attack constitutes a violation of international law. Museum artifacts from the Golestan Palace previously moved to secure storage following the 12-day war, and the incidents in January 2026 were not affected in the recent airstrike and remain in a safe location. Now, here is what I believe is going on here. So I cannot stress this enough. Iranian state media, war going on, United States, Israel, leaders getting killed, everything else that's happening. This heritage site was damaged. And this is the top story. There's many other stories that seem much, much more important. This is the top story. Why are they emphasizing this? For the same reason that Larijani is talking about the Persian cultural heritage of 6,000 years. They're trying to signal Persian pride, to trying to conjure up the fact that they're not enemies of the Persian people, they're protectors of the Persian people. They want the Persian national pride of the Iranian people to turn against the Americans. Now, it's not going to work. This ploy is not going to work. I'm just telling you this is the narrative framing that they're trying to give, that Persia is under attack, right? So they're emphasizing their Persian identity, which they've basically done away with by with this whole Islamism thing. But anyway, that's an interesting angle that they're emphasizing. Again, of all the big stories having to do with this war, the top story was that something nearby this site was bombed and it caused some damage to the site. I mean, even if you want the top story to be war crimes by the Americans and the Israelis, you're gonna emphasize something else like civilian casualties, which they talk about in other articles, in other stories. Or you're going to emphasize, what I'm going to show you now, some of the other stories that seem to be more important war stories. But again, this is propaganda to signal to their people that they are Persians, that they're proud Persians, just like you. Okay. Now, what else is WANA reporting? So another big story in WANA today is Aragchi wrote a letter to international organizations and foreign ministers calling on them to condemn what the United States is doing and that it's all clear violations of international law and that the attacks are war crimes. And in this, they talk about all of the innocents who've been killed. On the first day of the aggression, the deliberate and reckless destruction of the elementary school in Minab, a small city in Hormozgan province, led to the martyrdom of 165 innocent female students. And then they go to how there were attacks. There were similar attacks in other cities. And then they go down to accuse the Americans and Israelis of attacking hospitals. On March 1st, 2026, the buildings of the Red Crescent, Gandhi, Motahari, and Khatam al-Anbiya hospitals in Tehran, Abuzar Hospital in Ahvaz, and 3 emergency bases in Sarab, Chabahar, and Hamadan, along with several residential buildings in northern Tehran, were targeted. Okay, so, and that they also targeted densely populated residential areas. These are all war crimes. Okay, so they're accusing the Americans and the Israelis of committing war crimes. So there's war crimes by striking a World Heritage Site, and there's war crimes because they're attacking hospitals and residential areas. Now, this is the most two-faced thing in the world. The Iranians literally, with every single missile they fire, targets residential areas. Yesterday in my town here in Beit Shemesh, a few minutes walk from my home, there were 9 people killed and dozens injured in a direct strike of a ballistic missile. An entire family was wiped out, father, mother, 4 children were killed in the attack. They deliberately target civilians. That's all they do. Hamas Hezbollah, their proxies, that's all they do is target civilians. So here they are accusing the United States and Israel of targeting civilians. Okay. And then another story in WANA, we're just going through what the headlines in WANA are. What story is Iran telling? Grossi stresses return to diplomacy on Iran's nuclear issue. So this is reporting on a meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency that had a special session about what's going on today. And here's how they report it. They reported that the Board of Governors met, and they were concerned, monitoring very closely what's going on in the Middle East. That's all true. Speaking at the opening session on Monday, Grossi said the IAEA had responded immediately in line with its mandate, focusing in particular on the risk of radiological emergencies, which is true. That's what they're doing. They want to monitor to make sure that there's no, if nuclear sites get hit, then, it could cause radiation in the area. It could be very dangerous. So they're reporting on this. And what their whole agenda in this piece is to basically say, to wave a finger at the Americans saying, if you hit nuclear sites, you could cause a lot of radiation leaks, and you could cause, all sorts of dangers regarding Iran's nuclear facilities. Grossi said that as of now, the agency has received no indications of damage to or targeting of nuclear installations. Okay, it also said, so far, no radiation levels above normal have been recorded in countries neighboring Iran. So far, so good. You haven't caused the type of damage that could raise radiation levels, but basically warning that the Americans and Israelis shouldn't be striking nuclear facilities. Now, two interesting points in this article. One is that it lists all the other countries in the region that have nuclear reactors: Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, right? It says that they all have operational research reactors. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. But the other point, and this was the most interesting part of this article to me, is that, let me find it. It says in here that the IEC, here we go. He explained that the agency's Instant and Emergency Center has been activated and that a dedicated team is gathering information and assessing the situation. The Regional Safety Monitoring Network remains on alert and is in constant contact with the agency. Interesting. It says, so what's it saying here? That the IAEA is in constant contact with the Regional Safety Monitoring Network, right? Now, I went over to the IAEA website and found Grossi's actual remarks. Now, in his remarks, he says, efforts to contact the Iranian nuclear regulatory authorities through the IEC continue with no response so far. We hope this indispensable channel of communication can be reestablished as soon as possible. Look at that. Efforts to maintain contact, and in the WANA piece, look what it says. Efforts to maintain contact with Iran's nuclear regulatory authorities through the Incident and Emergency Center are ongoing. Just says that the efforts are ongoing. So it's very deceptive language. It makes it sound like the contacts are ongoing. It just says, they're checking things out, and the efforts to maintain contact are ongoing. It doesn't say that the Iranians are refusing that contact, because here it says efforts to contact the Iranian nuclear regulatory authorities continue with no response so far. This line was left out of the report of Grossi's remarks in the WANA story. In other words, what's this all about? Let me back up. This might be getting a little confusing. Let me sum up this piece here. Why is this a news item in WANA today? Okay, why is it a news item? Because the Iranians want to signal that they're cooperating with the IAEA, which they're not. Grossi said that he's trying to make contact. His people are trying to make contact with the regulators in Iran, and they're not successful. They're not getting a response. Iran wants to warn the Americans and Israelis against attacking the nuclear. They want to highlight the fact that Grossi is calling for a return to diplomacy, which he did say at the end of his remarks. Okay? It wasn't the main purpose of his remarks. The main purpose of his remarks was to give a report on the situation on the ground with all the nuclear assets in the area. But he does call for a return to diplomacy. So their headline is, we want to return to diplomacy, because they want to negotiate. They want to return to the diplomatic table. They want to turn this into a negotiation over the nuclear. Okay? So they want to stress that, but they can't run a report on what Grossi said if it criticizes them. So they obfuscate the fact that they're not actually cooperating with him. Got that? Okay. One more. Or actually a couple more stories that they in WANA. Another story in WANA today is that although the U.S. has said that 3 servicemen have been killed, and I think today CENTCOM added a 4th, here they're saying that the Americans might be lying and there might be a lot more Americans dead. Their evidence for this is that the 3 coffins were transported in a C-5 Galaxy, which is a massive aircraft, a massive transport aircraft. It's the largest military transport aircraft operated by the United States Air Force. And therefore, they say, the use of such a large aircraft to transport only 3 bodies has been viewed by some military analysts as unusual. And they're saying that the discrepancy between officially released figures and the visual evidence circulating publicly has prompted renewed questions regarding the transparency of information and the actual scale of losses sustained by the U.S. forces. Questions that remain without a clear official explanation. So the purpose of this story, this little propaganda piece, is just to say that more Americans have been killed than they're saying, because hundreds have been killed on the Iranian side, and they want to claim that the Americans are hiding their casualty numbers. And along the same lines, they want to show that America is panicking or weak. So they have a headline: U.S. turns to U.K. for support amid rising tensions with Iran. Now, anyone following this would be laughing, because Keir Starmer is not someone that that Trump would turn to for help. But look what it says. In less than 48 hours, the United States has reached out to the United Kingdom for assistance, seeking to use British military bases to counter Iran's missile threats. Now, it's true. The United States, Trump has said that he's upset at the British for not allowing the United States to use Diego Garcia to use their base. He's annoyed at them, and he wants to use their base, but they're framing the story as though the Americans are seeking the help, and in less than 48 hours, the Americans still suddenly need to turn to the British to bail them out, to help them. That's the way they're framing it. And then the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, also said, our partners in the Gulf have asked us to take further measures to protect them. Oh my gosh, the Americans can't protect the Gulf states, so the Gulf states turn to the UK to ask for their protection. The Iranians are trying to signal with this story that the Americans are panicking and weak and can't protect their allies, so they need the help of the UK, because everyone knows that the UK is more favorable to Iran. Okay. And finally, the final story I'm going to mention that was on WANA today is that they're saying that they might have killed Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is complete nonsense. The fate of Prime Minister of the Israeli regime is shrouded in uncertainty. The Public Relations Office of the IRGC announced that the office of the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime and the location of the commander of the regime's air force were targeted and severely struck by the Islamic Republic's armed forces in the 10th wave of coordinated and surprise Khaybar missile attacks. The fate of the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime remains uncertain. Look at that. Iran's successful missile strikes against the occupied territories focused on the government complex of the Israeli regime, and the results of these attacks will be announced later. So they're saying that it could be that we've killed Netanyahu. All right. It's absolute nonsense. But so from here, you see the different narratives they're pushing. Just to sum up again, there's this Persian angle that they're pushing, trying to present themselves as defenders of the Persian people, which is the exact opposite. It's the Persian identity of the Iranian people that makes them despise the regime. And they emphasize that with this UNESCO site. And then you have Aragchi, trying to say that that the Americans and the Israelis have been bombing hospitals and schools, and they're committing all sorts of war crimes, and trying to emphasize that the Americans and Israelis could cause some nuclear disaster in the area, and calling them back to the negotiating table, and also claiming that they're cooperating with the IAEA. And then these stories about American weakness and Netanyahu being killed. So that's the story the Iranians are telling. Just a little check-in on them. One speculation that's been on my mind, I'll just throw it out there, maybe I'll talk about it more in updates in the coming days, is the Iranians entered this conflict with reportedly about 2,000 ballistic missiles in their arsenal. The Israelis say that in the first day and a half of this, we destroyed about half of their missiles. We're also destroying a lot of launchers. And Iran has been firing missiles, not only at Israel, but as we've been talking about ad nauseum, at everyone else in the region too. So the question is, what happens when Iran runs out of missiles, runs out of the ability to fire missiles? What happens then? That'll be an interesting turning point in this war, which I'm anticipating is coming sooner than we think. Have a happy Purim, everyone. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to check out all the great content at Israel 365 News YouTube channel as well. And go to the Israel 365 News website, Israel365news.com, for some news from a biblical perspective, coming out of Israel. It's a great news website. I write for it, and you can also check out my author page at the Jerusalem Post at jpost.com. And please keep sharing and watching, and tell everyone what we're doing on this channel. God bless you.